Hi, I'm Justin Ott, physical therapist and founder of Ott Physical Therapy. I'm joined here today with Mike Thomas, the Baltimore Ravens physical therapist. Mike, welcome to the show, and can you give me a little introduction about yourself?
Yeah, what's up, Justin? Thanks for having me on here, man. I really appreciate you asking me to do this. We go back a long way. University of Pittsburgh days. That's where I got started with everything. In 2015, I graduated with a Bachelor of Science degree in athletic training. And in 2014, prior to graduating, is when, as a student intern, I was able to intern with the Pittsburgh Steelers for an entire season. And that's really where I got my foot in the door and started with down this path into the NFL. Following that internship, I stayed at Pittsburgh where I studied physical therapy. And I learned from a lot of like the really most established experts in our field there, just like you did. I got to work at the Rudy Sports Medicine Complex where we worked with everybody from like a pro Chinese basketball player to your youth high school athlete, which was really cool. Following graduating in 2018 with my physical therapy degree, I got a job and worked as a seasonal assistant with the Detroit Lions for the entire year. And really, I was there to serve more as like an intern athletic trainer. But I got to travel with the team, and I was much more involved with them on the day to day than I was with the Steelers, which just gave me a lot more really valuable experience. From that, I segued into a job with what was called the Alliance of American Football in 2019. They no longer exist. I worked for them from January of 2019 till the beginning of April, and they kind of went belly up. But I was lucky enough to get an interview with the Baltimore Ravens right when that company collapsed, and I've been with the Baltimore Ravens ever since. April 15th, 2019 was my first day there, and I'm now going into my seventh season. I started as an assistant athletic trainer and physical therapist with them. And, over the years, my role has changed. My title is performance therapist and assistant athletic trainer. Much of my role revolves around putting together plans for our return to play process. So what does that involve? It's a lot of like end stage rehab with on-field running and drills. It's communication and collaboration with the strength and conditioning and performance team. It's planning and monitoring training loads throughout the rehabilitation process and throughout the first few weeks back into competition. So that's some really neat stuff. And that's where I get to use a lot of my skill set from my strength and conditioning certification and certified performance and sports scientist certification through the NSCA. Outside of that, still doing a lot of the day-to-day treatments and rehab for short-term injuries, on-field coverage and injury management during practices and games. I'm actually heavily involved with the concussion program within the Ravens and adhering to the NFL protocol with all that. Everything from baseline testing to game day management and then rehabilitation after injury to get them through the NFL protocol. I deal with a lot of like our foot and ankle things and evaluating and measuring for orthotics and ordering them to help our athletes fit into their cleats appropriately and dealing with our equipment staff on that. I'm a part of the NFL ACL knee injury task force, which has been really cool. And we're piloting a program for mitigating ACL injuries. And that's just a little bit about me. I'm sure we can go into a lot more detail. And yeah, that's about it.
That's awesome. That's a lot of cool stuff, and I definitely want to get into some of that as we go. I got some questions for you on that because that's definitely unique to the niche of physical therapists and what you do. So that's pretty exciting stuff. I know my brother-in-law is a huge Ravens fan. I was down there in 2013, I think it was, when they took on the 49ers and came away with the last Super Bowl ring. So they're my second team at heart. So this is awesome to hear from you. So I want to dive right into it about just football. I know I want to get you on here, your expertise in working with the professional athletes and in that realm of sports specifically is going to be something I think is going to be useful for people to know about because football is a sport with explosive plays and hard-hitting impact. Every play has the potential to make or break a season for a player. One play could be your highlight reel for the year or it could be your sideline injury. So what are some common contact injuries you have seen?
Yeah, we see a little bit of everything, to be honest with you. It is a very chaotic and unpredictable sport. So head to toe, anything and everything is involved at any given moment. But some of the more common things, like you asked about, knee, shoulder, ankle, hip. In the knee, we see a lot of ACLs. Unfortunately, at the Ravens, over like the last 5 to 6 years, we've actually seen a lot of multi-ligament knee injuries, which has been pretty challenging. And they're pretty devastating too, in the moment. And it takes a long time for guys to recover from that and get back up to speed. In the shoulder, we see a lot of dislocations, rotator cuff tears, AC joint separations. We had our string of pec major tears for a while there. Classic sprains in terms of lateral ankle sprain, high ankle sprains, We've actually had one or two dislocations, which was pretty interesting. We've even had a Mason New fracture. And then head, neck, and spine, a lot of concussions, a lot of cervical spine sprains, and those sort of things. Uh, that's the more common stuff outside of, hand, wrist, finger injuries, things like that. A lot of elbow UCL stuff.
That's a whole gambit right there. I remember treating someone with a pec tear, and that was a tough one to get back, especially when you're doing something so impactful, pushing all the time as a linebacker. So that must have been a fun one to get through.
Yeah, we've actually been seeing a few of them in our offensive linemen, but most of them actually in our defensive backs, where it's a hot, open field, high speed collision where they have an outstretched arm and they're just being overstretched in that moment. So it's been pretty interesting.
Is it common to see players enter the medical tent after a hard-hitting play? I know you're talking about the concussion protocols and stuff that you've been working on, but you see almost every Sunday someone's getting hard hit and they're going right into that tent. Can you tell me a little bit about the insight of what those tents are intended for and why they are important?
For sure, yeah. The blue medical tent on the sideline that most people are aware of, they're really valuable for us. What you don't recognize as the viewer or the fan observing the game, though, is that most of our injuries are actually evaluated right there on the sideline or on the bench, and you just never even know what happens. We use the tent more so to get out of the eye of the audience or the camera when it is obvious that we have to check on something. The tent is also always used within the NFL protocol if there's a direct blow to the head and and we suspect concussion. That always has to be used for that, and that's just part of the NFL concussion protocol. But the tent, it's good to get out of the public view, but what you have to realize is that there just really isn't a lot of space in there, and the space that is there gets taken up really quickly. You have the injured athlete, you have at least one doctor, if not two. You have our head athletic trainer in there. Sometimes I'm in there. And really, the only space that you have is just enough to edge around the treatment table. And not to mention, there's absolutely no soundproofing. So when it's third down and the fans are screaming and the video board's going and you're trying to talk to the athlete about what's going on, it can be pretty difficult to communicate in there. So just some little nuances that people don't really recognize.
Oh, that's good to know. And then some of the worst injuries from football that I've seen didn't even involve contact. And I always think of, well, football, everyone's getting hit and smashing into each other, but it's that player on the other side that just went for a sprint and you see him fall down without getting hit and you're wondering what happened with that. So when you see a player go down without being hit, what are your first instincts in training as a PT watching from the sideline?
We all have a certain role and responsibility on game day. I'm just one of a medical staff of seven, not to mention we also have about three or four doctors there with the team on game day, and then also unaffiliated doctors that the NFL provides on the sidelines as well. So I am just a cog in the wheel of what makes it turn. So when I see an injury happen on the field and the player goes down, whether it's contact or non-contact, my role within that cog of the wheel is to go over to that injury tent we just talked about, get everybody out of the way, cameras, people standing on the sidelines, whatever, get the tent prepared so that if they do need to come to the tent, I have it up and ready for the doctor and whoever else needs to be in there to evaluate the player. So that's just my instinct, right? Like I just go into what I'm trained to do. Now, we see an all call signal, or if we get radioed an all call signal, that's the worst event that can happen. That means we all have to go onto the field and tend to the player right then and there. And that's for a more serious injury, like a cervical spine injury, where we need to spine board the player, or even worse, it might be something where we need to start performing CPR because of cardiac arrest. So when you talk about instincts and when a player goes down onto the field, I just immediately go into my role and my responsibility and make sure that I'm ready and prepared for what we need to do to make sure that we are as efficient as possible to get that player what they need.
That's an awesome system. Regardless of the contact, non-contact, whatever the injury is, you guys are prepared for it. So you would expect that something with the NFL. We all see it on the sideline, room for our favorite teams, but to hear it coming in action of this is the process of what you guys do and how you approach it is that's on point with giving some of the best service you can imagine for an athlete on the field.
For sure. Yeah.
Unfortunately, these injuries do sometimes sidelight some of your favorite players, and even the high skilled athletes get hurt, and it can knock them out for the season. So, what is it like as a PT? This is diving a little bit of what you're talking about with getting returned to sport and kind of seeing what they can do to get back to their peak performance. What is it like to do that, working with an athlete to get them back to their level of performance so they can return to the game?
It's difficult. Each case presents with its own challenges. I always try to view it as, I'm here not to overcomplicate the process. I like to say that we're always just putting guardrails around greatness because these guys have everything that they need to do to get themselves back up to speed and running. We're dealing with the top 1% of athletes in their sport, if not in all athletics, right? So I'm not trying to overcomplicate anything. I'm trying to keep it simple and just give them that path that will give them the most positive result that we can end up with.
And then going from pro athletes to all across the realm of athletics. I had a recent discussion with one of our old colleagues about youth sports and importance of injury prevention. We really focus on the use of strengthening and sport specific training. What are some differences with preparing an athlete at the professional level during the off season to minimize risk for injury during the season?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a good conversation to have. Being a part of the Ravens, it's really awesome. I mean, we have not only a medical staff of 7, but we also have a strength and conditioning staff of about 5 people. We have a performance staff of 2 or 3 people. We are a unit. We are a sports performance unit that helps these athletes perform to their highest level. So in the off season, what am I doing specifically as the physical therapist? Not a whole lot if they're healthy and they're up to speed and they're ready to go and train. That's where the strength and conditioning coaches come in. They do all of the planning and programming and making sure that the athletes are getting what they need in the offseason. It's a lot of running, it's a lot of lifting weights. The football coaches then, when they're allowed to, based off of NFL rules and all that, can then take them out for practices and do position drills and things like that to get more of the sports specific training. And all along the way, our sports performance department is monitoring their training loads. Periodically, we use markerless motion capture systems to do a biomechanical analysis and put them on force plates to kind of check in on their readiness in response to training, and then also flag any like biomechanical faults that might be happening that might be worth investigating from a medical standpoint. But off-season training, it's a lot, and it's way more time consuming and a bigger commitment for these athletes and us staff members at the Ravens than probably what the fans and the outside world thinks. It is Football just never stops, and we are always moving, and we're always trying to make sure we're prepared for when Sunday night football comes.
Talking about force plates and different ways you can analyze the response or readiness of the athlete. For me, working in a clinic, there's different protocols or return to sport specific evidence that we use to test people out. When you have an athlete that's at the professional level that's getting injured, to make sure that, hey, this happened last Sunday, we want to get you back for next Sunday or whatever your timeline might be. Do you use certain specific return to sport the literature or testing that you do specifically with the Ravens to make sure that you're doing everything thoroughly to get them back? It sounds like you do and you have the resources for it, but just give a little bit of insight on what you're actually doing to get them back.
We always like to stick with the latest evidence that's out there, right? Everything we do is evidence based. We like to really stay up to date with the research and what's going on outside of the Ravens world to make sure that we're staying up with the latest and greatest techniques and tactics and science based, strategies to get what we need accomplished. That includes the force plates and the catapult for tracking their running speeds and all that kind of stuff, right? More specifically about, kind of my role in all of this, what I alluded to earlier is part of that return to play process is that we develop a plan early on that's communicated to all the stakeholders, and it keeps everyone on the same page for timeline, progressions, goals all along the way. So everybody knows where this athlete is at, when they're supposed to be there, and what they're doing. That's probably the most important thing outside of all of the really fancy bells and whistles, is making sure everybody's on the same page and everybody knows what's going on and what's expected of the athlete. Now, more than the majority of the time, I don't want to put a number on it, but the majority of the time, when it comes to knowing if an athlete's ready to play on game day, we know that decision going into the game, several days in advance, right? Now they may be listed as questionable because anything can happen leading up to that 24 hours before the game, but we're usually pretty confident that the athlete's ready to go. In the smaller proportion of times where we're not sure if the athlete's ready to go and it's truly a game time decision, that's where we take the athlete out onto the field and prior to warm-ups and all that, and prior to those cameras that get out there, and sometimes they sometimes they still find us in the process, but we get out there early onto the field on game day in the stadium, and it's my job to take them through a good warm-up and a good workout to assess them functionally and assess their readiness in terms of, are they able to get up to speed, are they cutting and pivoting and jumping the way they need to, do they look strong, do they look confident, do they feel confident when we're talking to them, hey, when you're doing this, do you think you can do that, what situations are you ready for on game day, and try to mimic those scenarios so that we know that we without a doubt we can recommend to the coach in the front office that this guy's ready to go. Again, that goes back to the communication aspect of it. And that's really where my boss comes into play, is he's the head athletic trainer of making sure that everybody's aware of what's going on. And that's kind of the fun part of our job. Is sports medicine isn't always black and white, right? We have to live in the gray, and we have to get them through a process that maybe nobody's done before, and maybe we're kind of pushing the boundaries and the limits of what we're doing. But you know what? That's sports medicine, and these guys are ready to play. It's their job to be on the field, and if they're not on the field, then they're not able to do their job.
It's probably one of my favorite parts of being a PT when you get to be, you're treating someone with an ACL reconstruction. You finally get to that point of, are they ready to get back to the thing that got them injured? Whether it's their psyche, whether their confidence is back, are they compensating with certain things? And I've seen a lot of times that we kind of check the protocol. Yeah, they can run, they can sprint, they can cut back and forth. But to get into what is specific to that patient or to that client, that athlete, to be able to do, hey, if you're a linebacker, can you explosively push off, get that force going in there? You're a receiver and you're just having to sprint out and do a hard cut right now and then dive and be able to tuck and roll. Everything that comes with being able to be specific to the position, but also the athlete's skill level to really test them to make sure that they're good to go and you're confident, but they're also confident to get to that point. What are some different areas you focus on to be sports specific with your training that tailor to the different roles and positions on the field?
Good question, and it's really important to be specific to the position, and to what the athlete's needs are. Right? I'm not going to treat the quarterback the same way that I treat a linebacker, and I'm not going to treat the offensive lineman the same way that I'm treating the safety. Right? So all of these guys have different positional demands, which means that the interventions that we do and the training that we do has to be tailored and specific to those needs and those demands. So, I mean, we can go down a long wormhole and rabbit hole of like what those specific demands are for each position. Some of them may be fairly obvious. But yeah, it is very important to be individualized with our training when it comes to rehabbing injuries to make sure that the players can meet the demands of what's expected of them. And more often than not, I try to put them in situations where they are absolutely prepared for the hardest moment on the field so that when they get to the field, all of the other stuff comes relatively easy and the hardest moment may not be as hard as what we thought it would be.
I think with your line of experience too, being in the NFL for 7 years going on and just all the things that you've seen, you've learned and you've grown from it too. I always have this hindsight is 2020 to kind of think about and learn what got you to where you were in this point. So what would be your advice just to conclude with everything for other physical therapists that want to elevate their skills when working with highly skilled athletes?
I think in today's day and age, probably maybe the most important thing to think about is that we have to remember why we're there. And it's not for ourselves. It's not to promote ourselves. It's not to be in the camera or the limelight, right? We are there to help people, and we are there to treat injured people. Because at the end of the day, yeah, these guys might make a lot of money. Yeah, they might be out on TV and in the media a lot more than anybody else, and they're very popular. But at the end of the day, they are people, they have a family, they have children, maybe they're married, right? And we have to make sure that that person's healthy and safe and can do their job to the best of their ability to continue to live a happy and healthy life. So for me, always remember the personal component of it. We are in medicine, we are not in well, I might be working in the entertainment industry. I am in medicine and I am there to take care of that person. So it's not about just racing into the big leagues to be in the big leagues. It's about making sure you understand why you're there and you're taking care of the people for the right reasons.